I'm Janice Stein, the chair of the Lionel Gelber Prize, offered in partnership with the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy and Foreign Policy magazine. Margaret MacMillan's wonderful book, War, How Conflict Shaped Us, is one of our 5 Lionel Gelber nominees this year. It is a riveting analysis of how war has shaped society through history and how society continues to shape war. It is just an extraordinary personal pleasure for me to welcome the distinguished historian, Margaret MacMillan. I can't think of anyone who has done more in her career to make history come alive and weave this rich tapestry around whatever she writes. And her book, War, How Conflict Shaped Us, is exactly within that tradition, already been chosen by the New York Times as one of the 10 best books of the year. So, Margaret, what a pleasure to have you with us today.
Well, Janice, it's lovely to see you, even virtually.
I know we all miss, I think, seeing each other in person right now. What an absolutely marvelous read this is, Margaret. What made you write about war in all its dimensions this way? You said in your acknowledgments that you've been thinking about doing this for a long time. But what pushed you to commit so much time and effort to the study of war?
Janice, I think I've always been interested in war. I just have. And perhaps I was spurred on a bit because occasionally I'd be told that girls shouldn't be interested in war, which, as we know, sometimes opposition makes you to be even more determined to do something. But I've taught the history of the 19th and 20th centuries, and war comes into it a lot. And when I was at Ryerson, my first university, I developed and taught a course on war and society, and I became just so fascinated by the ways in which war shapes societies and vice versa. Very difficult to disentangle.
Is this, Margaret, in the great tradition of Charles Tilly, who the sociologist who are, in a very famous phrase said, war shapes states and states shape wars, that without war we would not have much of what we consider modern in today's world?
Well, his book and his subsequent writings are very powerful. And I think he's onto something. I mean, certainly you can disagree with how influential war is. But I think if we think of the ways in which war has shaped governments, I mean, the growth of big government has had a lot to do with war. The way it's shaped the map of the world, quite literally, the lines on the map often are affected by war. The way it's shaped our social values, the way it's perhaps changed our societies. I mean, speaking as a woman, I think the 2 world wars made a real difference to the status of women. Now, we wouldn't choose to do it that way, but we have to recognize that war is an enormously powerful force.
I'm glad you brought up women, Margaret. It is women and gender and war are woven together throughout your book. And in such often contradictory ways, really. Let's talk about the good side first, the changes in the status of women that war brought about.
Well, what the 2 total wars, and they had to find a new word for them, the First and Second World Wars, the total wars of the 20th century did, was involve societies on a very large scale indeed. And that meant involving women. And it meant getting women to do jobs and fill roles that they hadn't been expected to do in peacetime. And so the arguments against giving the vote to women or letting women into the professions or letting them do certain kinds of jobs, which used to be made that women simply couldn't do it, they didn't need to do it, they went up to it, those fell away during war because women showed that very clearly they could do all sorts of things that men, it had been expected, would do. And so I think getting the votes for women was speeded up in a number of countries, in Britain, in France, in Canada, because of women's contribution to the war effort.
It's a remarkable story, really. I was born in the province of Quebec. It was only after World War II that women were finally given the vote. And so you could draw a direct connection there, really, between suffrage and war. And war was also an opportunity for women outside of the war-making machine itself. I mean, their roles, their responsibilities grew in wholly unexpected ways during the first part of the 20th century.
And I think for a lot of women, war was liberating. I've read some very interesting research done on women, interviewing them after the wars were over, and a lot of them said, I loved getting out of the house. I loved having a job. I loved having my own money. I'd always been dependent on someone else. And suddenly I became my own person. Now, we know that after a war ends, things often move back a bit. When the men came home, there was a move to push women back into the household because it was said they were taking jobs from men. But I think the gains that women made during wars in a number of societies were never completely undone.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I don't think it was always an easy adjustment for the soldiers who came back from battle to find that the role of women had changed so dramatically while they were away. I mean, there's interesting memoirs written by men about how hard that adjustment was.
Yes, so the women had got used to going out on their own with their friends. They got used to doing things like manage the budget for the household. They got used to fixing things. No, I think it was often a very difficult adjustment for men. Gender roles do change during times of crisis. I mean, we're seeing it, I think, in the COVID crisis. And sometimes it is difficult for people of different genders to adjust to this.
It really is. There's no question about this. Is such a this is such a dramatic portrait that you paint in the book of these unexpected consequences of war on women. Let's talk about the other side, Margaret, because the other side of this, of course, you write about the hyper-masculinization of warriors, and which goes back almost forever. And so war is quintessentially a male activity that excludes women. And you trace that back really to the earliest times.
As far as we can see, it runs right back through most societies. And of course, the further back you go, the more difficult it is to find the evidence. But it seems to be that men were expected to be the warriors. They were expected to show certain characteristics. Now, as you know, there's a huge debate between those who say, well, it's all biological. It's all, evolution has produced these traits in the human being. I tend to think it's culture as much as biology. Men we know have more testosterone than women, but does that make them necessarily want to be fighters? A lot of men, one of the reasons you have military training is because a lot of men don't want to be fighters. What military training does is overcome that. And I think culture has a huge amount to do with it. If you grew up in ancient Sparta, if you were a free person, not a slave, you were expected as a young man to be tough, to be ready to die, not to mind being hurt. You were brought up to do this. And, I think the power of culture is very important here.
Oh, I think it's enormous. And were there tensions that you could trace, Margaret, in earlier times between those men who really were reluctant to go to battle and didn't fit that stereotype that culture was so profoundly important in reinforcing?
I think there were often real difficulties. I think young men who grew up, say, in the Prussian Junker class, or in the Anglo-Irish aristocracy in Ireland, who were expected to go into the military. It was seen as sort of really the best career for someone of those social classes. And if they wanted to write, if they wanted to do music, if they wanted to do something, they would face often tremendous social opprobrium, and often their families would find it very difficult to deal with them. It was quite difficult. As we know, it's quite difficult to go against the prevailing culture that you live in.
Let's talk about probably the most extreme hyper-masculinization that you write about, which is, and you do so, I think, with compelling impact, if I could describe it that way, Margaret. You talk about the rape. You write about the rape of women by soldiers coming back from the battlefield. There's one quote from Stalin about which just stuck in my mind after I read it. Tell us about the quote in the context.
Well, Stalin, as we know, was a man of very little human compassion at all, but his attitude, in fact, was quite common. And it was pointed out to him as the Soviet armies rolled westwards across Europe, that a lot of raping of civilian women was not a way for the Soviets to win support among the local populations. And this was a real sort of blot on what they were doing, and in fact was going to cause them all sorts of political trouble. And this was raised with Stalin, which was a difficult thing to do, you can imagine. But they said, someone said, look, perhaps it's not a good idea that our men are raping so many people in countries that we want to be sort of basically on our side. And he said, he said, the soldiers have fought hard, let them have a bit of fun, they deserve it. And unfortunately, that is, Stalin was exceptional, but that is unfortunately a very common attitude. Women have so often been seen as the prizes in war, and it's been seen as okay somehow for soldiers to go ahead and rape civilian women. And sometimes it's more than that. Sometimes it's a deliberate tool of war. Yugoslav nationalists, Serbian nationalists in Bosnia, when they rape Muslim women, are reported to have said, now you will have to bear a Serbian child. So it was a way of sort of destroying the morale. I mean, the Yazidi women who were taken off by ISIS, again, and forced to bear the children of their captors, I think, again, it was a way of destroying the coherence of the Yazidi. And it's a dreadful and unfortunately very common feature of war.
And what's stunning, Margaret, is that persists right it's still a fact of life in modern warfare in some parts of the world. That has not changed. There's been war, rape by soldiers has been declared a war crime. But if we actually look, there's remarkably little progress in constraining rape by armies.
In fact, I think, Janice, I sometimes worry that it's becoming more widespread, that it's being seen more as an acceptable tool of war. I think a lot of the inhibitions and prohibitions against attacking innocent civilians, including using rape against women or against young men as well, a lot of those prohibitions have fallen away because so many of the wars are civil wars, or they're wars fueled by intense ideologies. And when you have that sort of war, anyone on the other side is expendable. You don't see them as being fully human. So I really worry that in the 21st century, we're seeing worse treatment of civilians, perhaps, if that's possible, than we've seen in some earlier wars.
Do you think, Margaret, that's possibly because there's a decline of what you described as total war earlier? That these wars are, they're total, but they're on a smaller scale. They're less visible on a global scale. And therefore, we're getting, frankly, I agree with you, regression from where we were even 50 years ago.
Yeah, I think what we've got is forces fighting who aren't terribly well disciplined. If you think of the war that's going on in Afghanistan or Somalia or around the Great Lakes region in Africa, often you have forces who come together for a particular purpose. They often come together just for loot or for prizes, and it's very hard, I think, or if not impossible, for their officers to control them, even if the officers want to control them. And no army ever has its military, its soldiers completely under control. But I think in the modern professional armies of the 19th and 20th and centuries, you did have an attempt by the officers to control them, and not always, and it never works very well. And there's always that danger in war of even the most disciplined armies getting out of control. And it's this tension between military discipline and what these people, largely men, are trained to do. And of course, what they're trained to do is kill others and use violence.
Just before we leave this subject, it is stunning, of course, that peacekeeping forces under the UN, wearing blue helmets, have engaged in rape of women. And so I think that's so difficult to explain because they are not there as combatants. They are not part of the faithful fighting for the ultimate cause, and yet that still takes place in the context of modern battle.
Yeah, well, I think it's the reverse side of what we know is one of the cohesive forces of armed forces, and that's a very strong sense of camaraderie. But along with that goes a sense of we're somehow different from ordinary civilian society. And once you begin to see yourselves as a part, and you see the people among whom you live or the people you have to interact with as somehow different, you begin to devalue them, I think, or the danger is always that you'll devalue them. And you saw it with mercenary soldiers in the Renaissance. They wore very distinctive types of uniform, not uniforms so much, of types of clothing, and they treated civilians as another species and a lesser species. And I think, unfortunately, we see this today.
Just to close this off before we go on to another theme in the book, there is something in this hyper-masculine concept, though, of fighting and combat and war, which makes women a special prize, a booty of war, in the way that other male civilians are, that male civilians, frankly, are not, Margaret.
No, I think it's a subject that I think we've only really begun to explore, the gendered nature of war and the role of women in war. But women are often the victims of war. But I think we should remember that women can also be its cheerleaders. I don't also buy the argument that women are naturally peace-loving and kind. Think of the women in the First World War who went around giving out white feathers to men of military age who weren't wearing uniform to shame them. And I'm afraid, there is that other side as well, that women's engagement in war is at many levels and many different types of engagement.
Well, one of the interesting examples we see of that are the very, very diverse reactions of mothers. We've had mothers, for instance, in modern Irish history, come together and say, enough, enough, enough with killing our sons. But we have mothers who celebrate their sons' sacrifice and martyrdom and praise the cause. And both of those kinds, both are women, but with very, very different responses.
Yeah, no, there was that fascinating book I read about the troubles in Northern Ireland called Say Nothing. And it talks about those who supported the IRA, even in its more extreme forms. And quite often it was the mothers who brought the children up, both boys and girls, to regard anyone who was not part of their cause as another who could be killed, who was disposable. So no, it is, well, we know how complicated it is. We know how important social values are and the ways in which people look at themselves and others are.
Margaret, in the book, you also inevitably write about war and technology. And we're thinking back, of course, technology has been a hugely important part of shaping war, but war has been so important in generating innovating in new kinds of technologies. And we're probably now at one of the most rapid points of evolution. Do you think that for a long, long time, for example, in the United States, it was the military that innovated first, and then the benefits of technology spun off to society? We've reversed that now, and we're getting a lot of innovation on the civilian side, which the military are adapting. Do you think since that relationship has changed, that war will change?
Well, the relationship always swings back and forth. I think, you often get the military adapting the local technology. I mean, one of the reasons the Europeans made such strong cannon in the 16th and 17th centuries because they used civilian technology for making church bells. So that was, an example where they took from the civilian world and brought it into the military world. And gunpowder, which was initially used not so much for war, but used for, used for other reasons, in fact, used as a medicine. And so I think it works both ways. At the moment, it seems to me, yes, I think the edge has swung, particularly in big powers like the United States, to what the civilians are up to doing. And that is partly because the nature of warfare is changing. I mean, we have this whole gray area, which is, it's hard to say whether it's war or peace, cyber war. It's not the direct application of violence and force against your enemy, but it clearly is a way of getting your enemy to do what you want or defeating your enemy. And the great advances, of course, have been made in Silicon Valley, but on the other hand, Silicon Valley wouldn't have existed in its present form and been so powerful without all the money that the United States government invested during the Cold War in computer technology. The internet itself is a product of military spending. I mean, that's where it started. And so I think it will always swing back and forth. I think what's really challenging today is what war is moving into new areas. And of course, we can talk about artificial intelligence. How do we as human beings control it at all? I mean, controlling war is always a problem, but how do we control artificial intelligence?
It's so interesting because we have such, in some ways, surprising evidence, Margaret, which you know well, that even drone operators who are way back from the battlefield at a distance, somewhere sitting in Texas, who can use a precision-guided weapon to kill a single target, nevertheless suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. They experience much of what a soldier in combat on the battlefield experienced.
And I gather, I mean, I was talking to someone in the US military who said this is really a problem, and they have had to think of ways of counseling them. But what I'm wondering about is when we get to the next level, I mean, drones, self-guided weapons and self-directed weapons are becoming much, much more important. And if we get to a point at which you don't need the operator sitting in Arizona or Texas, you simply have the self-guided armored vehicle, the self-guided naval ship with no one on it. I mean, they're talking about the next generation of fighters and Navy ships not having people on board. Who is in charge? And we know that with artificial intelligence, already it is, you're getting computers or other mechanisms capable of learning from what's happening, capable of changing themselves, changing their own algorithms. I mean, there's a big debate, as you know, going on at the moment about where do we build in some form of human control? Where do we build in the ethical assumptions? And it doesn't look like we're doing much of that.
The great trap here is that we will be, as we always are, and your book shows this as well, that we will be behind the technology. That there's always an interest in new technology, and there are people who work on it because it's challenging and it's fun and it's exciting, and then we let the genie out of the bottle, and we haven't really thought through. This is the ongoing nightmare, though, among historians and social scientists who are thinking about the future of war, the one you've just talked about.
Well, and there's the real conundrum. You have some incredibly intelligent machine or system, and you tell it to do something. What if it misunderstands your directions? And the classic one raised by a philosopher was, what if you direct whatever it is, the thing run by artificial intelligence, to keep human beings safe? And the answer might be to put this human being in a lead-lined coffin under the ground with an air tube and feeding them in drugs to keep them happy, but which isn't what was intended. But that's the danger, I think.
It is. There's almost nobody who actually thinks seriously about war, Margaret, who isn't worried about putting this technology in a straitjacket and making sure that autonomous weapons are actually not deployed, and certainly the ones that are capable of inflicting any kind of severe damage on civilians.
I mean, I think there is thinking going on in particular circles. There's thinking going on in the military. There's thinking going on in those worlds. But what worries me is in societies like Canada, the United States, and Britain, where we've lived, most of us, through what they call the long peace. I mean, not everyone in the world, as we know, has enjoyed the long peace, but those of us in very lucky countries have. And I'm not sure we're thinking about it enough. We see war as something remote.
That brings up a question that I know you and I have talked about, Margaret, but we both teach in universities, the same university, and we've seen the interest in the study of war in diplomatic history decline, really, over these last 20 years. I've seen departments where there, frankly, are no courses that teach the material that you cover in your book. Does that worry you, Margaret? Is that a function of the long peace?
It worries me because I think, partly, as I've said, war is so important and has played such an important part in our history and has helped to make the world in which we live and helped to make our societies and our values. We know there are other things, of course, but war has played a very important part. So we are missing a dimension of ourselves and our world if we don't know more about war. But what worries me also, of course, is that war hasn't gone away. There's war going on somewhere in the world every year and has been since 1945. I think, it worries me. And I'm not sure it's student choice. I mean, fewer students are taking history and international relations and political science. We know that. But when courses are offered in international relations, in international security, in war itself, they're very popular. I suspect part of the problem, especially in North American universities, is the study of such things as international relations and war and what used to be called diplomatic history are seen as somehow illegitimate.
Why, Margaret? It's part of, as you say, it's part of our history, it's part of ourselves, it's part of what shapes us.
Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking about this, and what I think is partly that history departments and political science departments have changed, and they're studying different things, and they can't study everything, which is fine. But I think there is a feeling that if you want to study something like war, you must approve of it. and that studying things to do with power, when we should be looking at people who have not had power, and of course we should be, but we should also be looking at those who've had power and what they've done with it. I think we need both. We need history of the big, powerful structures, and we need history of those who live in societies which feel the effects of these powerful structures. But I do worry about it because I think, places like the University of Toronto educate the next generation of those who are going to be leading and shaping public opinion in Canada. And if they don't know anything about international relations, if they don't know anything about how Canada has come to occupy this particular place in the world, if they don't understand anything about war, are they going to be properly equipped to do their jobs?
I think it will leave a huge hole in people's educations if we don't, in fact, have a fully encompassing sense of both of the historical forces that have made our times. But I think the fundamental point of your book, Margaret, is that war has always been with us when we were tiny societies, when we were clans. It's been with us through the emergence of large, powerful industrial states. It's changed again as technology and society's changed, but it will always be a part of us. I think that's what you want us to take away from this book, isn't it?
I think so. And I don't say this with any pleasure, particularly when I look at the future. But, I think we are getting more and more talk now of a possible state-to-state war. And of course, the one people think about is China-US. Now, that's talk, but the fact that we're even talking about it seems to me to suggest that war is still there in the ways in which people are thinking about the world and states are thinking about dealing with each other.
If you and I were to sit down and have this conversation in 15 years from now, Margaret, would we be talking about war?
I'm afraid so. I would like to think we wouldn't be, but given the record of the last millennia, I'm not sure if in 15 years we're going to be that much different.
Thank you so much, Margaret. To all our listeners, this is just a superb book, War, How Conflict Shaped Us by Margaret MacMillan. Go out and buy it and read it. You are in for a treat. And if I can say, Margaret, not only in terms of the substance of the book, but the absolutely magical writing. It is just sheer pleasure sitting down and reading Margaret MacMillan.